All right. Well, thank you for coming. This is the start of the 6th season of the Annisquam Village History Discussion Group. And we're still going strong, obviously. Okay. And tonight we have Scott Memhard, who is, you know, the local expert on ice. So with that, I just turned.
I don't need any more of an introduction than that. That's great, Dave. Thank you.
I had some other cool lines, but I'm not going to get to
I hope we'll have some more puns like that. So this is sort of a work in progress. Some of you may have heard parts of it in the past, but I feel like I finally arrived here at the Annisquam Village Hall. I've done it in Manchester, did it at the Sawyer Free Library, at the Cape Ann Museum, but I'm really getting into the upper echelon here now. I should also warn you up front that I'm really trying to figure out how to fashion this account of mine into the equivalent of a really gripping, gritty Dennis Lehane novel. And the title would be The 5 Families of Gloucester's Ice Business, or perhaps the Last Iceman of Gloucester. And it's not a story that Sebastian Junger or Mark Kalansky have tackled yet, or even Israel Horowitz has not yet made it into a Gloucester play. So the ground is fertile for me. This is very, very much a work in progress, and today may spur you, I hope will spur you, to share and contribute your own recollections, to go home and search for old photographs and ice artifacts to help me add to the fabric of our account before it's too late and lost from our memory. I'm lucky to be in a business that has such a rich tradition. I met my wife, as many of you know, Cape Ann Museum curator Martha Oakes, in the mid-1980s when I was a young man new in town, desperate to learn about Cape Pond Ice Company's history. And I visited the Cape Ann Historical Association, as it was called then, to look at the old leather-bound schooner logs that recorded how many tons of ice were taken on each fishing trip. And this presentation this evening here tonight is really an outgrowth of that meeting in the 80s. The significance of ice has very much faded from our awareness. If you ask any child today, any child or grandchild, where do you get ice? Where does ice come from? They shrug. They look at you with a puzzled expression. They say, God, duh. You go into the kitchen and you open the freezer side of the fridge and it's there. What's the question? And our point, our lesson really is that it wasn't always that simple. It used to be a lot more than that. So on to the story of the 5 families of Gloucester's ice business. First, in Gloucester, there was Nathaniel Webster. Nathaniel R. Webster, originally from Essex, who built upon a smaller scale existing local ice business in Gloucester here of Abram Williams. Nathaniel Webster was dubbed in the Gloucester Daily Times of the time the pioneer iceman of Gloucester. His keen business sense led him to perceive the fishing business, although then in its infancy, we're talking 1840, promised to be of vast magnitude, and Mr. Webster was prompt in knowing that large quantities of ice must be used, and he at once began steps to control this business for the fisheries. And this was a pursuit carried on by his son Nathaniel Webster Jr. As you likely all know, before using ice, typically salt was used to dry and preserve fish in the flake yards that you see along the harbor in the old historic photographs, paintings, and postcards. Nathaniel Webster's blacksmith shop was on Union Hill in Gloucester, and he constructed an earthen dam at his brook to form Webster's Pond in 1848. We're looking here at a slide of Webster's Pond. He did not have an ice pond on his farm originally. He constructed an earthen dam, I guess I just said that, at his brook to form Webster's Pond, and he built his ice house there. This was a 100-foot long dam. It was later carried away by a flood, which was a source, quote, of great discouragement, but subsequently rebuilt by the younger Nathaniel, with the indomitable energy which proved to be a characteristic of his throughout his life. The Websters expanded their ice businesses and operations to Upper and Lower Days Pond on Eastern Avenue. And I have a few photographs. The cat's cute, so in the foreground. But the cars are on Eastern Avenue here. The upper pond is Upper Days Pond, where we still see the turtles in the sun, just below Wolf Hill Garden Center. And then the ice house on Lower Days Pond is about where the Dunkin' Donuts is today. And the larger pond was down in the marsh just behind Good Harbor. And here's another picture that gives you more perspective. You can see Good Harbor across the marsh in the distance and the iceway up there. And then again, this is that house in the background is still there at the entrance to the Wolf Hill Garden Center. But the ice house here is down in front of it on Lower Days Pond. Subsequently, the Websters expanded their ice operations further to Cape Pond in the town of Rockport, where our company still gets its name. And they were virtually monopolizing the entire ice business on Cape Ann for almost 2 decades. Nathaniel Webster died in 1858, but his distinctive yellow house and his yellow, white, and Greek Revival home overlooking Gloucester Harbor, built in 1845, still stands, although, as you may know, recently as a rebuilt replica. His son, Nathaniel Jr., is described in his 1990 obituary as perhaps one of the most remarkable citizens that Gloucester has ever had, and for years was, quote, the heaviest taxpayer in the city. A real honor, apparently. Now, this is Nathaniel Webster's December 1990 obituary in the Gloucester Daily Times. A December 1874 article in the Cape Ann Weekly Advertiser captures the community's interest in those days in our ice harvest. Quote, ice cutting has been a full tide of successful operation the present week, and a good crop of prime quality, about 12 inches in thickness, is now being housed. Mr. Nathaniel Webster has cut his pond at the head of the harbor, and also on the Days Ponds and Patches Pond on East Gloucester. Everything has worked well, and hundreds of our citizens have visited to witness the harvesting of the crop by steam. These are just a few shots of the ice house. This is on Cape Pond. We have all these ice tools on display at Cape Pond Ice Company in our historic office display, but it's wonderful to see them being used. And this is Cape Pond, December 1938. There were 2 ice houses on Cape Pond, the Grove and then the Great House, which we see here. If you hike into the woods behind Cape Pond off Nugent Stretch, you can still see all the granite foundations for this old building. This is December 1938, and they've just completed the first ice harvest on Cape Pond of the season. You can see one little reject chunk of ice that didn't make the grade. So it's all been put away in inventory, and of course they used sawdust as the insulation back then. Typically they were able to get 2 ice harvests a year back then, one in December and then again in January or February. It was clearly colder than it is today. So on to Gloucester Ice Family number 2. Webster was 1. Number 2 in Gloucester, the brothers William and Francis Homans. In 1876, William and Francis Homans, at great financial risk to themselves, with over $75,000 of their own resources invested, created in West Gloucester an artificial 32-acre Fernwood Lake in a former meadow. And they built one of the largest ice houses in the country, measuring 236 feet by 210 feet with a capacity of 38,000 tons of ice. Francis Homans was born in 1832 in Beverly. He worked as a clerk for some of Gloucester's most prominent businessmen, including George H. Rogers, and then in 1868 embarked in the East Indian Suriname trade of fish and molasses. He owned several vessels before he turned his attention to ice, which was in great demand but with wildly fluctuating costs, ranging from $3 to $9 per ton. Frank Homans formed a partnership in 1876 with financing from the largest ice buyers in the fishing industry, including the Atlantic Halibut Company Cunningham and Thompson, I'm sure no relation, right, Bob? Yeah. John Pugh and Sons, G. Tarr and Brothers, and others, based on the premise of furnishing a reliable volume supply of ice at guaranteed prices not to exceed $2.50 per ton for an extended period of 10 years. At this point, Gloucester's fresh market fishery consumed over 40,000 tons of ice a year in schooners and ashore, not to mention kitchen ice boxes. Oysters made a cool sideline at the Fernwood Lake office at 145 Main Street in Gloucester. You can just see the oyster display in the far corner there. The Fernwood Lake office, this is on Main Street, right below your office, by the Savings Bank, I think. But not all was calm in the cold winter's night. The established players in Gloucester's ice business apparently, quote, unified in unnatural and unwarranted opposition, end quote, against Mr. Homans, seeking to defeat his Fernwood Lake ice venture on his very first season. Witness Gloucester's infamous ice wars. So luridly described in the Cape Ann Advertiser, Friday, December 15th, 1876. And you're going to have to indulge me. I've tried to edit this, but the language is just too good. I can't edit it. I have to read it as it's printed in the paper back then. Our journalists today could learn a few lessons from the writers of the past. Dastardly attempt to ruin the ice crop at Fernwood Lake, West Gloucester. On Tuesday morning, Mr. B.B. Hansen, foreman of the Fernwood Lake Ice Company at West Gloucester, went on the lake to see about removing some snow. And he found a hole in which the water had come up and overflowed a considerable portion of the ice. He also saw marks of footprints in the newly fallen snow, which awakened his suspicion that all was not right. The examination of the hole proved that it had been cut with an ice chisel, the sides of the hole being nearly square, with the exception of a trifle rounding caused by the action of the water. A further examination of the pond revealed 30 such holes and 15 channels, all cut in such a systematic and scientific manner as to carry conviction that they were the work of man or men, familiar with the ice business, who had made these holes for the purpose of overflowing the lake. The water coming up from below, mingling with the snow, and then freezing would not only be totally unfit for merchantable ice, but the removal of the hubbly snow and ice would prove so costly, so expensive, and such a protracted job as to seriously hinder the getting of a crop of ice this season. The time during the prevalence of a snowstorm was a most propitious one for such a villainous transaction, and had it kept on snowing all night, the weight of the snow and the water combined would in all probability have sunk the ice. Things that people had to worry about in those days. This being accomplished, the holes would not have been seen, and foul play would not have been known or suspected even. This is one of the most dastardly and villainous transactions that we have ever recorded, and to the cessation of the snowstorm on Monday night may be attributed the failure of the nefarious scheme. There are strong suspicions that the plot was coolly premeditated. Right along your lines, Dave. And determined to prevent a crop of ice being gathered on Fernwood Lake this season, thus dealing a disastrous blow to the company which would result in a great loss. We hope that the guilty parties may soon be detected, as no man or business is safe while such rascals are at liberty. Anyone who would commit such a deed as above would not hesitate to fire a building or commit any other crime, if need be, for the accomplishment of their design. Perhaps the burning of ice houses on Cape Pond, Days Pond, and at Niles Pond, East Gloucester, may have some direct connection with a cowardly attempt last Monday's night. Time will tell. Don't you wish they wrote like that? This is almost as much drama in Gloucester in that day as when the Gloucester sea serpent showed up a few years earlier. Well, as most things do in business, even in Gloucester, controversy gradually settled. Fernwood Lake flourished alongside Cape Pond Ice Company as a welcome, reliable new major player in Gloucester's ice business, which very much needed this additional new capacity. Here we have a view from the top of the Great House on Cape Pond in 1938. And you can see inside the Great House here, they layer the ice from the ground up. Again, the insulation is sawdust. And you can see the crack of light coming in. It's just beautiful to see. They would insulate the top of the stored ice with a layer of straw or hay. I'm going to read another account that's just wonderfully descriptive. This is page 1 of the Cape Ann Advertiser, January 20th, 1893. Interesting scenes at Fernwood Lake, where handsome ice crop is being harvested. The great ice house was a hive of industry. Ice cutting had commenced and 125 men were at work harvesting the crystal product of the pond into the immense 38,000-ton ice house. For many years, there has not been such a handsome ice, 12 inches thick, clear as crystal, and entirely free from sap or snow, while the pond, with its markers, groovers, scrapers, and large gang moving up the ice, is interesting. The sight inside, I'm going to go back, I don't want to get to him yet, sorry. The sight inside the great house is the magnet. As one stands at the top of the first staircase, the scene is one mounting almost to fascination. The sharp click of the great chain, the clunk and chink of the great heavy ice blocks as they start on their long journey, and accompanying hum and cry of voices all make a scene not soon to be forgotten. The great crystal squares seem impelled by some superhuman force as they come sheep-like up the tramway and then slide down into the railway. The way is inclined and runs to the other side of the building at convenient spots or openings in the different houses under the roof, and before each there is a snubber which practically stops the speed of the great 300-pound ice cake so that a man at the corner can turn it, and away it goes down the steep incline into the smaller ice house, where it is packed by a large and active gang. Despite the apparent chill of the atmosphere, one could stand for hours and never weary of the arresting sight. The same thing over and over again. Soon 4,000 tons of congealed crystal, so welcome in the summer, will be stored away. This is Iceman number 3. You can't quite see the bottom of it. This is Freeman Abbott. In 1908, Holman's endowed Fishermen's Ice Company was facing political setbacks and loss of patronage, and reluctantly, Holman's sold Fernwood Lake, all their operations, to the Cape Pond Ice Company, which at that time had moved to the leadership of rock porter Freeman H. Abbott and his cousin James Abbott, our ice family number 3. And this is shown here, Freeman Abbott at Cape Pond in 1903. Francis Holmans died in 1913. And I have to say that his is an extraordinarily impressive stone befitting his impressive career fulfilling Gloucester's demands for ice. This is at the Oak Grove Cemetery in Gloucester, right on Washington Street. Abbott had established the F.H. Abbott Ice Company on his own terms in 1895. He had driven teams for Nathaniel Webster. He was a horse lover, eventually owning over 60. And by 1916, Abbott's company had also acquired Holman's Brothers ice houses in Magnolia and at Alton Bay, Mount Major on Lake Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire, where ice could be brought to Gloucester by rail. It was then a 14-hour train ride, with as many as 4 boxcars leaving for Gloucester daily. This was an insurance policy against poor ice harvesting during warm coastal winters, which occurred about every 10 years here on Cape Ann. Freeman Abbott died unexpectedly at Alton Bay in 1923. His son, E. Raymond Abbott, continued to run the business. Here's their Fernwood Lake Ice Company office again on Main Street in Gloucester. In addition to the large delivered household ice trade, Cape Pond Ice Company continued to supply large quantities of ice to the fisheries and also to the downtown saloons and summer hotels. Probably to the hotels here in Annisquam as well at that time. The office was located at 105.5 Main Street, where a display of modern electric refrigerators gradually replaced ice boxes. The 1925 Cape Pond Ice annual outing, which is shown in this photograph here, at Centennial Grove in Essex, commemorates a photograph with 45 men and boys, including many Abbotts, Days, Tebows, and other familiar Cape Ann family names. Incidentally, so here's Fernwood Lake again, huge, huge facility. And in Magnolia, the West family with their Cape Pond Ice wagon. And then we're back to the Fort Wharf Ice Company, where our company, Cape Pond, is located today at the end of the fort on Commercial Street. This is a Brendan Shea photograph that's in the Cape Ann Museum collections. Brendan gave this to Martha and me as a wedding present in 1986. This is the Fort Wharf Ice Building, which, according to David Rhinelander's research, but is not mentioned in Mark Kurlansky's recent scholarship, was the original 1925 freezer workshop and laboratory for guess who? Clarence Birdseye. So I tried to tell that to Sherry DiLorenzo this morning when they were opening up the new Beauport Hotel complex. She wants to take credit for housing the original. Well, I think he's a big enough figure that we can share him. He eventually, I think after 2 years, moved his Birdseye and General Seafoods Corporation up the street to the old Birdseye factory that has just been toppled for our new hotel this summer. In 1924, Webster's Pond was sold to the city of Gloucester for recreation land. Does anybody recognize this view? So this is Veterans Memorial School on Webster Street, and this is the site of Nathaniel Webster's first ice pond, which was constructed in 1848, as I said. And this is a fantastic photograph that shows the demise of that first great ice house here on Cape Ann. Spectacular, terrifying fire. And a beautiful photograph, actually. Very dramatic. This is an interesting article that was in the Gloucester Times some years back, but it shows where Webster's Pond and the brook feeding it was located in relation to where the Veterans Memorial School and our softball field behind it are located now. I think it was pretty much drained when the 128 extension was installed. This photograph shows the entrance in West Gloucester off Essex Avenue to the Fernwood Lake Ice Company. You can see F.H. Holman's 1822. That's a little early. And there's Fernwood Lake, which again is a 35-acre man-made lake, which is now part of Gloucester's watershed system. And the Sonolite Plastics The Sonolite Plastics factory is located inside the original foundations of the old Fernwood Lake Ice House on Fernwood Lake. Anybody recognize this gate? Just before the Rockport border, going into Nugent Stretch, just past Hagstrom's yard and the Pond Road on the other side. This is the way into Cape Pond, which is now part of the Rockport watershed. So I was saying that in 1924, Webster's Pond was sold to the city for recreation land. In 1943, Upper Days Pond was gifted as parkland, where neighborhood kids could always ice skate. And Fernwood Lake, which I was just showing you, was sold for all of $28,000 to the City of Gloucester Water Department. And also in 1943, Cape Pond was sold by Ray Abbott to Rockport, the pond itself. And the business, the Cape Pond Ice business, was purchased by an entrepreneur by the name of John Ryan. And this is actually John Ryan's passport photograph, which I found in the safe one night when I found the combination to the safe at the ice house in 1983. It had been locked for at least a decade. It was in the employee card catalog file under S. For safe, obviously. So John Ryan was the very enterprising, really visionary, hard-driving Irish. They arrived in Gloucester and were the beginnings of Ice Family Number 4, Gloucester Ice Family Number 4. And John Ryan built the Gloucester Ice and Cold Storage Facility on the State Fish Pier, and also the present Cape Pond Ice Factory on the fort in 1946, on the site of the original Fort Wharf Ice Company, which I showed you before, where ice from Cape Pond and Fernwood had been stored and crushed and loaded onto fishing boats. The little landmark Cape Pond Ice office, next to the Cape Ann Savings Bank, managed by Milton Smith for over 39 years, closed and moved to the Commercial Street facilities, and by the late 1940s, the natural ice harvest had been entirely replaced by reliable mechanical refrigeration, and the ice houses at Cape Pond and Fernwood were gone, burned, on only granite and concrete foundations remain. A December 1945 Gloucester Times article highlights the level of anticipation around John Ryan's investment in expanding ice capacity here in Gloucester. So here we are, this is Gloucester Harbor and Harbor Cove, and you can see the newly constructed Cape Pond Ice Company facility, first building in from the corner there. So this is the Gloucester Times in 1945. Gloucester in 1944 saw some 188 millions of pounds of fish brought around Eastern Point, and will see handy on 215 millions before the year 1945 ends. And we wonder where all the fish are. The fishing industry has been faced the past 2 years with the necessity of seeking ice from other cities in order to fulfill the demand. The Gloucester Ice and Cold Storage, with a plant capable of manufacturing 70 tons of ice every 24 hours, and with a supply of natural ice from local ponds, was still forced to import 12,000 tons of ice from other places, and even then was unable this year to meet the demands. Gloucester boats, many of them, were forced to go as far as Nova Scotian ports to ice up this past summer, while mackerel seiners went to Maine ports and others to Boston. Many boats lost valuable fishing time at the height of production this summer, waiting their turn to get ice. Fish processing firms, which also required plenty of ice to protect their fresh fish purchases in the heat of the summer from spoilage, were hard-pressed by insufficient ice to meet the volume demands of business. The answer was given by Mr. Ryan, who set to work to build an ice-making plant that would meet the requirements of a growing Gloucester, showing his faith in the future of this port as a fishing center. John Ryan's Cape Pond Ice Factory was a state-of-the-art modern industrial block ice plant designed by the Frick Manufacturing Company with 3,600 4-foot by 2-foot by 1-foot steel galvanized molds. Basically, giant ice cube trays. Only our ice cubes are bigger than your ice cubes, but they still make a great Scotch on the rocks. The blocks are manufactured in 2 indoor concrete and steel brine tanks, or ponds. We still call them ponds, sort of an anachronism to our history. Refrigerated with compressed ammonia, which does the same job for us as your Freon does at home, in your refrigerator or air conditioner. And harvested, quote unquote, it's actually manufactured today, by 2 9-ton Shepherd Niles overhead cranes. More than 300 tons of ice can be reliably manufactured each day using electricity instead of Mother Nature in order to serve a flourishing fishing industry. So throughout the 1970s and the 1980s, the fishing industry here in Gloucester thrived under the Magnuson Act and the new 200-mile limit excluding foreign fishing vessels. Gloucester Ice was managed. So here's our block ice manufacturing. We're just sinking this grid of ice cubes, ice blocks, into the dip tank to thaw the ice from the molds. The ice will all float up free when it's disengaged from the steel mold. The overhead crane will lift it up, set it on the counterbalance tipping tray that you see in front of you. Here we are loading ice onto the boats through the galvanized steel chutes. There are crushers up in the little overlook room there that would crush the blocks of ice. You can just feel the cold looking at it, can't you? It's a lot of ice. So here you see again the pond tank with a grid of 36 molds. Each tank has 50 of these sets of grids, or rows of steel molds. And Shepherd Niles overhead crane lifts them up, carries them down to the far end of the room, dips them in the dip tank to thaw the ice from the mold, lifts them back up again. We tip them out on the tipping tray, and then a conveyor takes them up to the 3rd floor of the ice house, around at the 1st floor, And the stainless steel molds that you see up above on the wall will automatically refill the molds with 40 gallons each of water to make our 335-pound ice blocks. Here you see we still call it harvesting them, although we're dumping them down against the conveyor. And then we still use the ice hook to pry the block out and send it along. These are actually our clear sculpture blocks, which we get a premium price for. They're much harder than the industrial white ice that gets crushed up and put on a fishing boat. It takes us 96 hours to freeze a clear sculpture block versus 48 hours for a regular white industrial ice. And the difference is that all the air bubbles have been removed through filtration and aeration and keeping the water moving to make a clear sculpture block, which is actually harder and denser than the white ice. You can see the corner of the ice house here with Fisherman's Wharf, the old Fisherman's Wharf behind it, and the Gloucester Unitarian Church. And I don't know if any of you remember Benny Benedetto or Phil Harvey. Phil was the manager at the Cape Pond Ice Company before me from 1940 to 1986. He was a real gentleman. Many people thought that Phil was in fact the owner of the ice house because he acted like it. He was there 7 days a week. He would take care of you no matter what. And he was a real Yankee gentleman. This is a 1976 photograph from the Gloucester Times of Phil. Ice has gone up a little bit since then. This is Everett Anderson and George Shea. Everett was the general manager at the Gloucester Ice on the State Fish Pier, and then George was the business manager at the ice company. He was the regular frequenter of the Rockport Golf Course in his later years. This is down on the fort. This is me and my dad. We're almost to us. So 40 years later, after the Ryans, here we are. Gloucester Ice family number 5. And perhaps the last ice men of Gloucester. My father, Dick Memhard, and I, from good German, Scotch, Nantucket stock. And now we are joined by my son, Larry. Well, in 1983, we formed a group to purchase the Cape Pond Ice Company from Jack Ryan and Jack Hodges, who were John Ryan's son and son-in-law in 1983. They, to their credit, astutely saw the writing on the wall back then for the declining future of Gloucester's fisheries and exited the ice business, leaving us new owners to scrape along. Next generations of Ryans and Hodges, which are both big Catholic families with Newton and Manchester connections, have been quite intrigued by our notoriety from our 1991 Perfect Storm sideline of popular t-shirts and merchandise. In the 1990s, we Memhards again updated and modernized the Cape Pond Ice Factory, investing in new technology. We put on new steel-faced insulated panels to replace the old cork insulation in the 1947 Harborfront Ice House. And we added a 40-ton automatic Turbo Tiger, which is ice generator, ammonia remote, ice machine, which uses ammonia refrigerant and makes sanitary ice on stainless steel plates, storing it in two 50-ton capacity automatic ice rake bins, giant erector sets, with an ice delivery system of screw conveyors and controls to convey the ice to trucks, to boats, to fish processors, and to our packaged ice production line. The new ice machinery operates alongside the original 1947 Frick block plant constructed by John Ryan, which is today a very expensive challenge to maintain, and which is used more today for ice sculpture blocks and block ice for our poultry growers and ready-mix concrete contractors than for the now modest demands of Gloucester's fishing industry. Today, after another 31 years, Cape Pond is the only ice company left on Gloucester Harbor. Our last full-fledged competitor, operated by the other 5 families of Gloucester's ice trade, the Brancaleones, Novellos, Lavascos, Masseris, and Parisis, the Sicilian-Italian fishing families who bought the Burnham brothers to form Gloucester Marine Railways in 1953, operating a 90-ton North Star flake ice machine on Harbor Loop until 1998, which is today the site of Maritime Gloucester. But we do face continuing competition with changes in refrigeration, insulation, chilling, ice-making technology, and the convenience of modern self-contained ice machines, both in fishing boats, plants, not to mention restaurants and home kitchens. as well as the dramatically declining fishing fleet, which has been impacted, obviously, as you all know, by overfishing, by stringent government regulation and catch share policies, as well as by pollution, environmental degradation of marshes and estuaries, and changing ocean temperatures impacted by global warming, which would not have allowed us clearly to harvest a good natural ice crop these last 40 or 50 years. So it's been coming. I do hope, as I'm sure you do as well, that the regulations will eventually be effective and that the proud Gloucester fleet will come back before the entire commercial infrastructure on Gloucester Harbor, including our sole surviving ice company, crumbles. Our current chapter, and there's a question mark after that in a sense, we're still seeking out new markets for our ice capacity and our products, including packaged ice sold from grocery stores, liquor stores, convenience stores. Our Fort Worth ice factory has been modernized, but it's still sadly underutilized today without the routine demand for ice from a remaining skeletal Gloucester groundfish fleet. So we branched out a little bit. What do you think of this? Would you like that in your living room? How about upstairs? This is actually at the Clark Art Institute and was sculpted by our very talented ice sculptor Derek Henry. It's a full-scale ice bar and lounge with 4 ice luges. This was for the William Bradford exhibit at the Clark, Waiting for the Ice to Melt. A wonderful series of paintings of the Arctic. And our sculptor created this ice bar in our ice house, disassembled it, drove it to Williamstown, assembled it at the Clark, waited for the length of the party, disassembled it, reassembled it outside on the lawn where it lasted another 2 months. And the funny thing is that the Clark, after 10 years, called me last week and said that they'd like to have a new ice sculpture. They have their glorious new expanded facilities. This is our Bob delivering a load of block ice. It's been palletized, and this was shipped to London on a freighter out of Montreal for an ice sculpture installation right on the Thames. This is in 2006. Just an example of some of the various things that we find ourselves doing. Here's Cape Pond Ice in Harbor Cove at night. We used to deliver ice this way, now we deliver ice this way. So we have a fleet of delivery trucks. When I got into the business in '83, we didn't own a truck. We relied on our customers to come pick it up. And I have to tell you that life was good. No insurance, no diesel, no truck maintenance. I mean, yesterday our new Penske lease truck broke down on the road with a full load of ice in it. A lot of headaches. Life has become more complicated. There's no question about it. Today we actually have small distribution branches in Peabody and in Lawrence, allowing us to extend the reach of our markets. We don't make the ice there, but we reload our trucks. From Peabody, we can serve the Boston markets, and from Lawrence, we can serve Lawrence, Lowell, Haverhill, up into southern New Hampshire. We have a lot of industrial bakeries, for example, that use supplies of ice. This is the side of our truck, all the different logos. And we had 2 very fun things this summer. I'm sure you're familiar with one of them at least. But the Carhartt Clothing Company identified us somehow. They sent a scout, and they did an all-day film shoot in the plant. And Carhartt, which is an established family business out in Wisconsin that makes this duck canvas, very sturdy work clothing. They don't hire models for their advertising. They actually use real work people. So they came into Cape Pond Ice after scouting us out, and they dressed Bob up as, in his Carhartt clothing. They spent a day filming. They made us give all the clothing back. They claimed it was prototype. Here's Greg pushing a block of ice on the. You see the Carhartt logo there on his cap. And using the crane. This one looks a little staged, but it's a wonderful photograph. Very talented photography. And the funny thing is that there's a photograph of Steve. This is actually Tom Testaverde on the Midnight Sun. So again, we're making the ice in block form. We're storing it in block form, but then when a boat pulls up to the wharf, he's taking crushed ice. And a boat will take anywhere from 1/2 of a ton to 20 or 30 tons of ice before they go off fishing. And then it's the melting of the ice and the trickling of the ice water. What do we see here? Say it louder. No, okay, now this is the moment of coming to God. How many people here, no fibbing, participated in the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge? Well, I think there's room for improvement on that. I hope the rest of you send your $100 to the ALSA. The one on the far side there, does anyone recognize the person underneath that cascade of beautiful ice? Excuse me?
Sam Gale.
That's not Sam. Sam did another ice bucket challenge later. He was shamed into doing it. But this is State Rep Ann Margaret Ferrante. I'm doing the honors. And then the photograph on the far side here is the Manchester Essex High School. They had over, I think, about 400 people, staff and students, do the ice bucket challenge. And they challenged, I think, all the other high schools in America, along with the DECA programs. And they had a fantastic time. And I think it's wonderful. They all used Cape Pond ice, of course, or if they didn't, they apologized for it in their YouTube videos. We accomplished a major bank refinancing this past spring, and we had a big celebration at Cape Pond. You might recognize a few of the faces here from Rockport National Bank and Mayor Kirk, Senator Tarr, Ann Margaret Ferrante, and Meredith Fine, who's been my attorney and business counselor, who's been very, very helpful. Some of the other bankers there. I gave them all life rings because I said that they'd given us a financial rope to survive on. We were able to refinance our business mortgage out over a much longer term and reduce our debt service expenses. And here's our crew. This is one of the photographs from Jim Hooper that's at the Cape Ann Museum. I think it's a great note to end on. You might recognize your Annisquam local, Sam Gale, who's been a staunch supporter and employee at the ice company for the past 8 years. Judd's grandson, as well as a crew of others. I like the ethnic diversity that we have in our crew. So that's pretty much the conclusion. I hope we have some time for a few questions. Can we get the lights back on? Yes, in the back.
When you harvested the ice from the pond, and then it was stored in the big sheds with sawdust, say how long would it last?
And that's the sort of thing that I'm really grateful that I don't have to worry about. Because once it was gone, they didn't have a chance to go back and get more.
Right.
You know, sometimes in my deepest nightmares, I worry about that sort of thing. But honestly, you know, we don't have to have that concern. I don't know the answer to that, because if they didn't have enough ice stored away, that was it. They were done.
But I mean, they were selling, the second harvest was in January.
If they were lucky, yep.
And then they were selling ice into the summer, I assume. But they would last all summer?
Apparently, like I said, I try not to worry about the things I can't control. Because it was obvious that they had it down to a science, apparently, to try and anticipate. Ice was so crucially important, particularly for the fishing industry here in town. Not just domestic and hotel use, but the fishing industry. I wish I had a clearer answer, but that's a good question. And I'm glad I don't have to worry about it. Yes?
Where did all the sawdust come from?
Probably Maine, from the lumber yards. Now it's all compressed and sold to us as pellets and bricks. But it was an abundant supply, and it was a very inexpensive resource then to bring it down from the sawmills. They used a lot of it. Yeah. Yes?
Who came up with the phrase, the coolest guys around?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. We actually had a competition at the Ice House back in the late 80s, and we came up with 2 identifying slogans. The coolest guys around, and Pure Yankee Cold. And we like to think that we're the coolest guys around, and then what we sell is Pure Yankee Cold. If you're from the South, you might hear that Pure Yankee Cold. I always knew you guys were cold. But we actually trademarked it back then, and we were in competition with the National Hockey League for the term. They ended up with the coolest guys on earth, and we're the coolest guys around. And we've broadened that out now so that we're the coolest guys and gals around. We even have some new T-shirts. We have onesies now. You know, the things we've branched out into. We have onesies that say the coolest kid around. Yes.
When the movie The Perfect Storm came out, was that your involvement in that plan, or did someone just happen to have the hat on and you wore it all the way through the movie?
What do you think?
I think it was planned.
You're wrong.
Really?
Actually, It's one of those, Sebastian Younger interviewed us, and we were part of, I think it's page 36 of the hard copy edition, the original Norton book. He describes the history of our ice industry. He describes Frederick Tudor shipping ice to India. He describes the factories that exist now and the ammonia refrigeration system and the big crushers. And he even says on page 36, these guys wear t-shirts that say that they're the coolest guys around. And we sold our first t-shirt out of that book. There was a tugboat captain out in Alaska that called us up and ordered a t-shirt. We never sold a t-shirt before. We just gave them out to our fishermen ice customers if we'd had a decent hot summer. But so Sebastian Younger sort of, I mean, he's a good publicist to have working for you. if you could line something like that up. He put us on the map. And Warner Brothers, to their credit, read the book. Their scouts saw Gloucester fishermen wearing Cape Pond Ice t-shirts that we had given to them. That's our claim to fame, honestly, is we gave them out to the men who deserve to wear them, our customers. I got one of those phone calls that I could, especially today, very easily have hung up on as a crank call. She claimed she was a costume designer from Hollywood who wanted to order 100 t-shirts and 100 caps, and, click. Fortunately, I talked to her. We'd never sold a t-shirt at that point, other than the guy in Alaska. We didn't know any better. We charged them $20 a shirt and $20 a cap. They ordered 100 caps and 100 shirts in a range of sizes because they didn't know at that point if George Clooney would be wearing it or Mark Wahlberg. And we're very thrilled that this character, John Hawkes, who plays Bugsy, Michael Moran, is the character in the movie who wears our shirt because he's sort of the quirky Gloucester type. He's an authentic Gloucester fisherman. And in the plot of the story, as it's portrayed in the movie, he's the one responsible for the ice machine on board the Andrea Gale. They bought 20 tons of ice at Cape Pond Ice Company on their last trip, which was 23 years ago, October 1st, and then they sank on Halloween 1991. And they really sank because of the lack of ice. It was ice that killed them. It wasn't the storm. If they'd had enough ice, they would have stayed out at sea out of harm's way. And they knew that storm system was coming up. But the ice machine had busted down. And ice machines are very unreliable at sea, in that very tough environment. You may remember the scene in the movie where the ice machine is shot. God damn the owner, he didn't pay the money for the maintenance. At that point, they have a very tough decision to make because they have finally a full hold of swordfish, which back then was probably worth a couple of $100,000. And they worked very hard. Been a tough trip. And if they stayed out at sea, they risked losing the value of that catch because of the lack of ice. The ice is cheap, but without it, the value of their swordfish plummets pretty quickly. And I love having a group of students at the Ice House, children, say, well, what happens to fish if it gets warm? What happens first? And what happens next? And what happens after that? I mean, when you get to maggots, their imaginations are really, ice is pretty nice. Nice stuff. So we earned a role in the movie appropriately, and when the movie came out, finally, it was a bestseller on the New York Times list for a couple of years as a book, and Warner Brothers didn't pull any of the punches in promoting the movie. They actually ordered another 11,000 t-shirts from us. We had to give them a break on that order, which they distributed to the Blockbusters and the Targets that were distributing the VHS and home DVD versions of the display package. And our shirt apparently fit their color scheme just perfectly. The first year, we sold $100,000 worth of merchandise the first year. Half of that was to Warner Brothers. A lot of it was retail people finding us. And then the internet was just beginning to happen in year 2000 when the movie came out. You think back, and we have a great website. We have a web store. We sell it online all over the world. And there's a scrapbook on the table in back that shows photographs. In the old days, we would sell ice all over the world. Good New England ice. Now we ship our t-shirts all over the world. And people send us back photographs, unprompted, wearing their Cape Pond Ice signature t-shirt in California or the Mojave Desert, Iraq, Iran, the Arctic Circle. It's sort of like a Where's Ralph competition. Where's Waldo? So we've enjoyed that notoriety. We've ridden it. We've advertised in Yankee Magazine. We've advertised in the New Yorker on occasion. The film clips that we were playing at the beginning of the program were on local cable TV. They're now on YouTube, of course. We still sell. We don't sell as much as $100,000 a year. The movie's 12 years ago now, but in addition to The Perfect Storm, now we have Wicked Tuna, the Nat Geo program. One of the kids on the hard merchandise was wearing our T-shirt in the first year's episode of that. Nat Geo told him to take it off for the second episode. They didn't want anybody else's competing brand. So all the boats now have T-shirts that have their own boat's name on them instead of the Cape Pond Ice brand. What's the guy's name who does Dirtiest Jobs?
Mike Rowe?
Mike Rowe. So Mike Rowe was here in Gloucester a couple years back. He did a round table at Pratty's Bar with the crew from The Deadliest Catch, the Alaskan king crab catchers, fishermen. And we'd given them a long sleeve T-shirt to use in filming while they're sitting around drinking beer and shooting the breeze. And the film crew had to stop, say the long sleeve Cape Pond Ice T-shirt didn't look right, stop filming, go get a short sleeve one. Okay, now we can start filming again. And somebody posted a selfie photograph of Mike Rowe and his puppy dog last week in Los Angeles, and guess what he's wearing? Cape Pond Ice. so you know, there's a future for us still. It's been an interesting ride, an interesting story. You would never imagine where things lead you to. So I'm told that the only survival now for the Ice House will probably be that we have to sell or pitch a reality TV show on the theme that you've seen here, the last Iceman of Gloucester, and dramatize our existence here and our struggle for survival against all odds. So,
When did the delivery of ice to Gloucester households stop?
It was during a period of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. There was a transition period where Cape Pond Ice was selling ice boxes and ice service, but also refrigerators. And there was this competition, refrigerators, they'll dry your food out. You want an ice box with the melting ice and the smelly, dirty ice water, right? It keeps the food moist. There was a real back and forth competition, but gradually the ice faded away. And of course now with global warming, you used to be able to harvest natural ice down in Pennsylvania, on the Hudson, in New York, in New Jersey, and it's been receding up into Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Canada. You really can't count on enough ice these days to be able to safely ice skate, let alone harvest a 24 to 30 inch effective harvest that you can use for commercial purposes. You've been a great audience. I hope you've enjoyed. You're ready to go back out into the chill night. I hope you think about that wonderful story of the horrendous sabotage of the ice crop, because the things that people had to worry about in those days. This was in a blizzard in December, and there they were out sabotaging their crop of the competitors. So. Dastardly. Great. Well, thank you all very much.